Yeah. What does the company look like from you're talking about like applying objectivity to sometimes subjective space, um, and the analysis of both science and people. My friend Alan Shaw likes to say you bet on jockeys, not horses, right? So you're talking about the teams.
Cool.
So how is the company structured to be able to do that, to apply that objectivity to all these facets of potential investments and do it in a knowledgeable fashion? I mean, obviously you guys bring great experience between the two of you, but is there, do you have scientific expertise on the team? Do you have folks who can dig into the weeds of these papers and the mechanisms of action and feel good about it prior to the human element, right?
We certainly do,
Mm.
but I'm not necessarily convinced that what we have is any different than anyone else. I've worked in many different places. I've seen what people have. Not only do we have people inside, but we also have consultants, we have networks, we have honestly hundreds of people that have worked at XOMA over the course of years who are antibody experts. And like I said, go back to what I said before, is you can rule things out, but I'm not necessarily sure you can rule things in. And so from our perspective, with our network to analyze data, scientific assumptions, hypotheses, preclinical data, whatever it may be, we're trying to find just enough information where we can make that rule in versus rule out decision. And then once we make that decision, then we turn it over to Brad, because Brad, at the end of the day, and his team are the structuring experts. The secret sauce of our business is not the scientific evaluation, because I'm absolutely convinced that there's no one in the world that's actually any better than anyone else. Otherwise, you would have someone that has significantly better returns than anyone else.
Yeah.
And that's actually not the case today. There may be periods of time where you have one particular fund versus another that has significantly better returns, but over a long time period, those average out. Why? Because we don't understand human biology. Right?
Yeah.
It's still, it's a dark genome, so to speak, in terms of what we're trying to figure out.
Yeah.
So the secret sauce of our business is actually the structuring component. So let me have Brad talk about that, because that is what I've learned from Brad. I'm not a royalty guy. He's the royalty guy.
Yeah.
He's the real brains behind the operation.
I was just thinking about your comment, though. I sat through some sessions at the conference this week, and I've had multiple conversations with biotech founders and builders in the last 3 days, and conjecturing that there's no one out there that's better than anybody else. I'm not sure how that message would be received on the stage at the JP Morgan conference.
So there's tremendous drug hunters and people that can pick out data, but it goes back to what I said before, though, which is that's only one aspect of drug development. The other aspect is the people.
Yeah.
And I am absolutely convinced that there's no secret sauce to actually picking people. Now, relationships matter, networks matter, and that's why you may see some funds or VCs do better over a period of time than others. It may not necessarily be the scientific evaluation, it actually may be the human component.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
But maybe we just talk about the kind of how we structure things and when I end up saying.
Absolutely. I think the key component is we stay humble and we stay realistic. And part of that is realizing that the optimism that we have in this space of biotech, right? Ultimately, the end goal is to improve human health in some form or fashion. But people often over-index on the speed, the timing, the cost, and what the outcome will be, because they look at comparables as what was the best of, right? That's what they're selling their story.
Mm-hmm.
What we all ultimately think of is what could realistically happen. And if that realistically happens, can we do well? If it fails, can we be okay? If it succeeds and we can power the excess returns, awesome. That's fantastic. So we can use structuring to kind of solve those elements where we don't make it an acquisition that's, far outsized for the size of our balance sheet and our portfolio, where we look at structure, like when will the next payments come in? Is there a way that we can bring some of that capital forward to us so that if the rest fails, we're okay? Like if you think about our process, every clinical trial is generally a 1 or a 0. I mean, it's hard when you have the gray area. I guess there are some 0.5s that people scratch their heads about, but there's the 1s and 0s. So it's a lot of stacked binary risk on top of each other. So we've got to make sure that we're being cognizant of that and also realistic. The most fun that we have is when we're looking at assets and there's discord amongst the team because we can't quite figure it out. Someone's falling in love with a certain concept or aspect of the deal. someone's like, getting the tummy rumbles about parts of the deal. And it's like, how do you balance that and figure out how do you make the appropriate like capital allocation towards it?
Our friends at Alston and Bird set us up with some amazing space to record during JPM week. The firm's national healthcare and life sciences practice has more than 100 attorneys actively involved in the healthcare industry across the full spectrum of legal disciplines. The signature strength of this practice is its ability to master complex representations that draw on the coordinated expertise of its regulatory, compliance, public policy, transactional, corporate governance, securities, FDA, biotech, IP, government investigations, and litigation practice areas. Alston and Bird represents life sciences companies and their partners in corporate stages, ranging from private to newly public to well-established, and in a variety of stages of product development from preclinical to post-approval commercial launch. Learn more at alston.com and tell them you learned about them on the Business of Biotech.
Owen, you hinted at the investment structure. Like where does the money come from? And then give us a picture of that.
Our capital?
Yeah.
Yeah. So a significant amount of credit needs to go to our CFO because he's kind of figured out the capital structure of the company. And then
Who's in the room, by the way, but camera shy. I won't fan over there, but
and then a deal that we did that Brad could talk about in a second. But we are extremely conscious of our equity capital structure. So if you think about a company, what a company's worth the summation of their cash flows divided by the number of shares outstanding they have. And then the comment I made about drug development and home building is very similar, which is it always takes more time, it takes more money. Well, in biotech parlance, that means equity dilution. That doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to be successful. It just means that you actually need to generate more cash flow to generate the equivalent dollar per share. And so what we've done is use a number of financial instruments to bring capital into the company in order to continue to deploy to increase the size of our portfolio. Mm-hmm. So interestingly enough, we have 3 financial instruments that are publicly traded. We have our common stock, and we have 2 perpetual preferreds. Those perpetual preferreds yield roughly around 8.5%. Despite being the smallest royalty company that's publicly traded, we have the highest dividend yield of any company. Yeah. So for those investors that want security and a continuous cash flow stream, they can actually buy our perpetual preferreds. For those people that would like to generate some more alpha and take some additional risk, they could buy our preferreds plus our common stock. Then in addition to that, we did a very innovative deal in December of 2023 that I'll have Brad describe because it was actually his prowess that got this done.
This is the same type of structuring that we do for our own new royalty acquisitions. I mean, that learning is going to be applied to how we manage the company and how we think about dilution. So one of the things that we're thinking about as we're trying to be more active and help other companies have capital that advance different programs by buying the different royalties was how do we build our own balance sheet? And we have royalties. We had at that point, it was early in its launch, Roche's Vabysmo for wet AMD, one of the fastest launches in Roche's history. Mm-hmm. And what we set up was a non-recourse loan specifically against a single asset. We partnered with Blue Owl Capital to come up with a structure that basically allowed us to loan that royalty stream to them for a period of time, secured solely by the royalty stream, after which time that was paid off and would revert back to us. And in that same time, we took that lower cost of capital and are able to then have a full balance sheet and be able to have helpful conversations like we're having at JP Morgan now for companies that are seeking ways to advance their own programs and so that we could buy new royalties.
Since the kind of 2007 pivot, we've had very minimal equity dilution. We only have 20 million shares outstanding at the company. So you can imagine a situation whereby we start generating operating cash flow, which should happen hopefully sometime in the near future. Mm-hmm. And we redeploy that capital not only into new ideas, but also into our own company. And what that does, it levers our future returns such that if we're right on assets 11, 15, and 22. Instead of generating $2 a share income, we generate 5. We've made the right investments, but we've also reduced our equity capital base. So in order to get bigger in this environment, you need to get smaller. I'm a huge proponent of that. If you look at companies that have done very well, in fact, if you look at the best performing companies in the S&P 500 over the last 20 years, you remove NVIDIA, which is frankly a technology play. 3 companies stand out: AutoZone, Domino's, and United Healthcare.
Okay. Yeah. I wouldn't have been the 3 that I assumed.
Me neither. Actually, when we do the analysis or look at the analysis, and there's one commonality across all 3 of those companies, that each and every year they remove about 5% of their equity cap, meaning they buy back shares.
Mm-hmm.
Their equity capital structure is being reduced. They're generating 3 to 5%, maybe sometimes more, maybe sometimes less of revenue growth on an annual basis. And they're leveraging that down to 20, 25% earnings growth. So there's leverage in the P&L, but more importantly, there's leverage from a fully diluted shares outstanding. It's going lower each and every time, which enables you to generate actually higher earnings per share, which generates a higher PE multiple, which lowers your cost of capital. So I go back to what I said before, which is that we're just finance guys operating in the biotech environment where, frankly, there's not a lot of fiscal prudence in our environment.
Yeah.
And we're trying to bring some discipline from our capital structure to this environment. And at the same time, as Brad mentioned, bring new drugs to market and allowing people to reap the rewards of their success and the fruits of their labor in a business that's frankly very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. This is where I wish Matthew Mamak, the partner here at Alston & Bird, who was going to join us, but unfortunately couldn't. I wish he was here, because I'm curious about the perhaps legal implications, or if there's anything you have to be careful about in this model where you're doing some pretty creative things with money. Yeah. Oftentimes creative things with money, puts you in the red zone of potential danger. I mean, is there any risk there? Is there any special consideration?
I think the way to think about it legally for a company is, it's more complex documentation. That being said, there's a number of counsels that are very experienced in the space now that can shepherd a client through that type of a situation. Mm-hmm. I mean, the way we think about it is ultimately we want to stay out of the company's way. We're a passive recipient of those same future cash flows that they would have received. And the whole point is, unlike, say, debt, which would have a lien against all of the assets of the company, this is independent of that. It can be just treated as if someone had sold us a brick of a house and like a complete sale of the asset. So it actually fits really synergistically with other types of finances. Like, it doesn't get in the way of different things that they're doing when the product matures. If they want to pursue other things like sell the company, it doesn't get in the way of a transaction. It's not like blocking or oversight. It doesn't have reporting requirements. We're not sitting on board of directors of companies. Like if you had, say, a new venture investor come into your company.
Yeah.
So it's the best of both worlds. For management teams, it feels very light touch and hands off. For us, it's great. It allows us to get the same information that they would have otherwise gotten from their large pharma or large biotech partner. Mm-hmm. And it's actually, aside from investing the time and doing the work, it's quite an elegant solution.
Yeah.
I'm a bit biased, of course, but having run companies, I would sell a royalty every day of the week, because at the end of the day, a 2% royalty is not going to be valued by the partner that I'm selling the asset to. It's immaterial. You can get that through COGS efficiencies, SG&A efficiencies. But what it does do, it limits the dilution to the equity shareholders significantly, such that they can actually generate a greater return. So then they can go back to their LPs and return additional capital, and that capital goes back into the venture community, spawn new companies. This is a very intense, capital-intensive business.
Yeah.
And to the extent that you can use capital that's outside of the equity spectrum and not actually be debt, because you don't want to lean in your business. The kiss of death in biotech is, in my view, venture debt or converts. You have to pay those back. And sometimes you can't pay it back. From a royalty perspective, we're taking all the risk. If the asset is not approved, it's on us.
Yeah.
And there's no downstream implications to the actual equity investors. So from my perspective, this is an unbelievable piece of paper, not only from our perspective, but mainly from the management team and equity holders at the company.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I would do this each and every day.
Yeah. You mentioned that you're entertaining a lot of attention here this week at JPM. What is the appetite for growth of the portfolio at this point?
Yeah, Brad, you
Well, I think for us, so we're incredibly disciplined about what we do. And the most important thing, like people, how many deals are you going to do in 2025? And I think that's a wrong metric. Let's say maybe we do one deal, but it's phenomenal. And the right thing that aligns with our investors. So it's not about volume. It's about what we're actually creating. But to your question earlier about thinking about it in the context of other solutions, I just want to come back to think about this as entertaining with math for a second.
Oh, I love math.
Talking to a company earlier.
Journalists love math.
Hopefully we can scale it down. But this is where it becomes that aha moment as to why I'm saying that is superior. But a company that's publicly traded has a $150 million market cap. It wants to raise $50 million to give themselves some operating cash flow and turn over the next clinical trial card. If they went to the equity community and did a follow-on, they would be selling a quarter of their company to someone else. New investors that now own fractional shares of the company equal to 25% of the company. And if they have partnerships in place, they're waiting for big milestones or big potential future royalties, they've sold that entitlement to 25% of those economics through that shared dilution. It put more pieces of the pie in place versus what we could do.
In addition to 25% on everything else that they have.
The future pipeline, the creativity, whatever they do. Right. And what we were illustrating to them was that the type of a deal that XOMA Royalty could do with them means it's focused dilution around the economics on a very specific asset or set of assets. Then they can keep and maintain the rest of the value they're creating across the company. Their proprietary pipeline can stay their proprietary pipeline. So that when hopefully one day the financing environment on the equity side feels healthier, you could raise capital when more people are excited about the space, when they've created more value.
Yeah.
And so it's a different paradigm. So hopefully the math wasn't too hard.
No. I mean, I get the fundamentals. You talked about the investment community's receptivity to the space or a space. That's obviously situational, depending on the biopharmaceutical developer, the biotherapeutic developer we're talking about. But we see a lot of frequent ebbing and flowing of interest in RNA and genetic medicine and bispecific antibodies, multi-specific antibodies. There's a du jour that seems like the daily part of that du jour equation is real frequent right now, right? I don't know, what do they call the frequency of waves? There was a time when there was a little bit more of a swell, right? But now it's so how does that play into what phenomenal looks like? To your point, Brad, you said, maybe we do one deal on 25 but it's a phenomenal deal. And I know that it's, there's no hard and fast answer to what phenomenal looks like, but does that
makes it more difficult for us?
It makes it more difficult for us.
Right about it. I mean, if you take a step back and think about our space, the ecosystem, the biotech ecosystem, there were 250 publicly traded biotech companies back in the 2005 or 2000 timeframe. Fund sizes generally are measured in the millions, not billions. Mm-hmm. And when you have excess profits in any industry, that invites excess investing, which drives down returns. It happens in every industry. And I would make a conjecture that I think that's actually what we're seeing in biotech today. I think there's actually too much capital in our space. Mm-hmm. I know people are clamoring for capital, and I know the sidebar conversations here this week are just people aren't investing in biotech, but I actually don't believe that to be the case. Mm-hmm. There's a ton of capital concentrated in the private markets. There's very little capital concentrated in the public markets. And ultimately, we need to get these companies public because the duration of the funds that are investing privately are measured in a decade, generally speaking, plus or minus a little bit.
Yeah.
There are some permanent capital structures, but nevertheless, the far majority of the capital is measured in a finite time period. We need these companies to get public, but frankly, we haven't given the public a great reason to invest in this system at this point in time. We funded too many companies. There's too much capital to wash, which is drowning down the returns. So we're seeing a bit of a washout in the space. And what the problem that we have when we assign or analyze certain opportunities is the therapeutic density that exists. Just look at CD19 in the oncology space.
Yeah.
You have bispecific antibodies, you have CAR Ts, you have across the globe. And at one point in time, I believe there are probably over 100 CD19s in development across the different modalities, essentially going after the same indications. That is what we call MAD. That's mutually assured destruction. That's what we learned in our
What was the first thing?
MAD.
Yeah.
MAD, mutually assured destruction.
Okay.
That's what we learned in our Political Science 101 class.
Yeah.
Right? And we're doing it to ourselves. So we as an industry need to be more disciplined in terms of how we allocate the capital. I am absolutely convinced of that. And when we do that, you're going to see the returns skyrocket because of what you said, which is we have all these new modalities. Many of them are actually bringing game-changing results, both from efficacy perspective, a safety perspective, and ultimately the patients. There are some we haven't quite figured it out yet, but that's always the case. If you look at the antibody space, it was totally foreign to people in the early part of the 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it's probably the most efficient way to actually make a drug.
Yeah.
And how well we can actually do this engineering on the antibody side. You have the RNA space and you've got the gene therapy space. And what we're trying to figure out there is how do we deliver all this stuff?
Sure.
And we'll figure it out. It's just a matter of time. And that's where we need that long duration capital. But the thing that's making it difficult is just excess capital is driving down the returns and creating this huge therapeutic density. I don't know actually what's going to happen in the obesity space. Well, what I can tell you is that the amount of capital that's gone in, even if it is the largest therapeutic area, and it likely will be, just given all the benefits, the question you have to ask yourself is, what are the returns going to be like? And the one thing that's changed in this space today is I'm not quite sure that the clinical side is as important as the commercial side. Right? Many drugs look very similar. Is there a big difference between 22% weight loss and 24% weight loss? I don't know. I don't know. But what I do know is that when you get to the commercial side, there are a number of impediments that the PBMs and managed care companies have put up where that 22 versus 24 is probably meaningless.
Yeah.
You have to follow the money in our industry. And unfortunately, there are very perverse incentives across the entire spectrum that drive certain behaviors that are not to the benefit of the patient. And ultimately, we need to change that. And hopefully that will change over time. But there are certain things in our industry that we just need to change ourselves in order to make that industry so capital can come back in the right pockets.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. Yeah. You covered a lot of ground there, Owen. We started out talking about some of these very specific indications and, the impacts of those sort of a microeconomy and biotech. But I wanted to get your perspectives. And when you start talking commercial weight loss drugs and companies in the public markets, now we're talking a little bit more about macroeconomic influences. So I'm curious about what, maybe some prognostication on what macroeconomic influences will impact your business model in the coming year. You think about things like inflation, you think about things like the, election year that we're in, the unknowns around who's going to be heading up FDA and NIH and so on and so forth. Any thoughts on like what your management and execution plan might look like in the face of some unknowns going into 25?
So I played sports growing up. I played hockey in college.
Mm-hmm. Are you Canadian, by the way?
No, but I sound Canadian.
Sometimes you do. Sometimes you do, yeah. Border state, maybe? Close?
Massachusetts is not really a border state, but
okay, but close. You played hockey long enough, you started to sound Canadian.
Yeah, I heard that quite often. But I had my bell rung more than a few times, and my father was my coach. He played in college as well, and he said, "Son, I'm going to give you one piece of advice, which is you're going to keep your head down, at least have your eyes up."
It did.
It's the same in our business. We can't worry about actually what's happening externally. We need to be cognizant of it for sure. But the one thing I do know is that great products, great sites, and great people will always actually work to the benefit of patients. It's happened every single time. There's no doubt in my mind it'll continue to happen.
Yeah.
So what we need to do is actually focus on those three components, search those out, and just structure things appropriately so that we don't put our own company in jeopardy. We could sit here for days talking about macroeconomics. I love talking about it. Tom and I talk about it all the time, interest rates and those type of things. But it does affect our industry for sure. The cost of capital, as you can see, the XBI is essentially inversely correlated to interest rates. But that essentially has always been the case in some respects, right? You talked about these waves in terms of our development. Well, the same thing happens in the capital markets, and the two actually kind of essentially sit on top of each other in many respects. But with all that said, I go back to my father's advice: you just keep your head down, your eyes up, and you stick to your business plan. Yeah. The one thing that we've recognized as we've tried to bring in different things into the business is that sometimes sticking to your core competencies is actually the best.
Yeah.
Right. You look at companies that try to go outside their core competency, more often than not, it's actually a failure, and it actually works to the detriment of their core competency, their core business. So we know what we're relatively good at, which is identifying opportunities that can generate, very good returns, both for the patients that we're trying to actually help, but also for the companies that we're trying to underwrite. And at the same time, be very judicious in terms of how we allocate our capital, very cognizant of our equity structure. And at the end of the day, our business is a function of one thing, just how much cash can we generate. Because if we don't generate cash, we're going to dilute our shareholders, which means that we can't necessarily put the money to work underwriting these companies that are developing the assets.
Yeah. Yeah. What does JPM week mean to you guys? What's your agenda here? Brad, what have you been spending your time doing?
A lot of company meetings. Folks exploring, learning, trying to understand. They've heard about royalty monetization. They're trying to understand how it could be applicable to them. There's a huge educational component to what we do. So we have a couple suites set up in one of the San Francisco hotels and skip up pretty much every half hour for 4 days.
Expensive.
Indeed. Yes. I'm staying in one of the lesser expensive.
Comes to Oakland. Yeah. So the great thing about XOMA is that we have champagne taste on a beer budget.
So we've been busy, seeing a lot, learning a lot. We keep our ear to the ground, and we're always learning because you never know where you're going to find the next piece of information that's going to be insightful.
Yeah.
So that's part. But the other part is talking to investors, helping educate them on the XOMA story, what we're doing, what our philosophy is as a management team, how we're trying to get great alignment between the management team and the shareholders. And both at the long end, both on the deal execution and new asset acquisition side and the delivery side for Wall Street, it's all about trust and relationships and doing the right thing for the long run. Not built overnight.
The only thing I would say is, what does JP Morgan mean to us? Essentially, what every day means to us, it's learning.
Yeah.
And you asked kind of what we've done in our career. We actually love to learn.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing better than actually meeting. We met with a company yesterday that is trying to develop an AI system to predict clinical results. I have absolutely no idea whether this will be successful or not. But if it is, can you imagine the benefit of that? I mean, that would be absolutely groundbreaking.
Sure. Yeah.
Now, whether it can happen or not, we don't really know.
Right. That's a fodder for another podcast.
That's that podcast. But it's pretty. But we meet with probably, 10 to 15 companies a day here, and probably meet with probably 10 companies a week, more or less.
Yeah.
And the things that we learn are just jaw-breaking. In fact,
sure.
we were just, this one anecdote is that we were at a meeting yesterday with one of our partners, and they mentioned something as it relates to the mechanism of action of a particular drug. And essentially our chief scientific officer and I looked at each other and we said, that's why the drug works. He said, an adverse event actually is what differentiates that drug relative to its competition. And we never heard it said in the way that it was said to us.
Yeah.
And we literally looked at it like,
you learned something.
I'm totally enlightened.
Right.
I'm like, I wish I knew this 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So it's all about keeping, just listening to people.
Sure. It's a good place to do it, but it also reminds me of why this week reminds me of why I would be a terrible investor, because I'm so prone to the shiny moments, and everybody's shiny at JP Morgan and everyone's, putting the best foot forward. So it's tricky.
It's tricky, but I would just say is that if you're in this business, sometimes looking where other people aren't is the best place to look.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the time, guys. We're running short on it right now, but the education that you talk about, the value of coming here to learn. I appreciate what you've taught our audience, what you've shared with our audience today. I think it was super beneficial, educational conversation. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, appreciate you guys taking time out of the super busy week to.
Well, your audience will appreciate it, but we certainly do.
I know they will.
Great
I know they
conversation.
will. Yeah, I appreciate it.